We all know how popular four-legged friends are and how they make such great domestic pets. A dog, as they say, is a man's best friend, and this man certainly cherished his time with his friend. Dogs make wonderful pets. They're friendly and loyal and emotive, but they don't live forever. Anyone who's ever watched Marley and Me will know how hard it can be to say goodbye to a canine buddy. But what if they come back? Viola Tizzle and her boyfriend Glenn Maloney lived regular lives, and they had a strong family bond with children Megan, who was 5, and Kevin, who was 3. It seems like they had a pretty good life and a happy time together. Like most families, they probably looked at the idea of getting a pet and settled on a family dog. One day, they decided to make another addition to the family unit, their Jack Russell Terrier named Mugsy. He lived with the couple at their home in Severna Park, Maryland. Mugsy, wonderfully named for a dog, was most probably just like every other dog. It's likely he loved walks, doggy treats, and marking his territory. They say dogs experience life much faster than humans, and there used to be an accepted theory that a human year is equal to 7 dog years. While it's not quite as easy as that, life does move faster for a dog than a human. Unfortunately, that means that they also don't live as long as their owners, as Viola, Glenn, and their children were about to find out. Back in 1990, on one fine October afternoon, 4-year-old Mugsy was outside Glenn and Viola's home. It was likely he was simply playing or wandering around, as dogs like to do when they're given free roam outside. However, Mugsy wasn't going to be playing for long. Unfortunately for the family, this is when tragedy would strike. Viola was at work, so Glenn was inside the house watching the children, and then it happened. Mugsy was struck by a car. It's possible that Mugsy would normally have been in the backyard with a family, or even playing in the house. However, on this particular day, it seemed as though he was outside the front and made his way to the side of the road. He can't have been aware of the dangers he was facing and what was about to happen to him, and this is no doubt why he wandered out into the road without a care in the world. If only he had stayed on the property that day, things could have been different. Many people covet many things in life, but Glenn and Viola were seemingly people of simple tastes. The thing they wanted more than anything was to have a healthy and happy family. They met and fell in love, and they had plans to marry in the near future. As a happy couple, they also wanted to strengthen that love with the addition of some children. The pair wanted to create a happy and loving home, which included both children and a furry friend. Whatever marriage plans and long-term goals the couple had would have to have been put on hold, as they were greeted with some truly life-changing news. The couple found out that Viola was expecting a baby, and they were to be parents in the impending future. Things were moving fast, and this was exciting but also nerve-wracking. Glenn wanted to get married, own a home, buy a dog, and then have kids, and preferably in that order. After negotiating pregnancy, Viola successfully managed to deliver a child, and she and Glenn welcomed adorable baby Megan into the world. This was what they'd always wanted, and they must have been delighted at the fact that they were finally parents for the first time. They'd started their own precious family, and the two of them were likely happier than they'd ever been. Now was the time to look for the ideal place to nurture their family unit. So the decision was made for Glenn, Viola, and Megan to move out to the countryside and into a farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The great thing about moving into a farmhouse is the space, and this is something that would have appealed to the couple with a baby girl in tow. The farmhouse was large and impressive, and there was plenty of room in and around the property for enjoyment. But there was one thing missing, one thing that would make the whole family unit complete. The one thing the family lacked, and something they'd been longing for, certainly for a while, was a canine companion. And so it came to pass one Christmas day when Glenn found there was still one box to open. Having told Viola he didn't want any presents himself, he was confused, and upon opening the gift was shocked and delighted to see a little Jack Russell Terrier. The dog was named Mugsy, and he became an essential member of the family. As Mugsy was so much a part of the family, even being there to see the birth of baby Kevin, it was clear how much this accident was going to affect them. Glenn heard the sound of a car braking sharply on the road outside, and we imagined he must have felt a knot in the pit of his stomach. Racing out of the house, keeping the kids inside, Glenn staggered out to the roadside where something caught his eye. It was Mugsy's limp body lying on the road. It was devastating. This heart-wrenching event actually gets even worse, as Glenn told the press, "I picked Mugsy up, but he went in my arms." This was a tragic end, and Glenn had lost his dear friend and an important member of the family. At least Glenn was the last face he saw and the last voice he heard. Hiding Mugsy from the kids, Glenn waited for Viola to get home and they dug a grave for him before retiring to bed, emotionally exhausted. Not everyone believes in the power of reincarnation or anything like that, but we're sure there was a moment when Glenn and Viola almost did. It was early morning around 3 a.m., and Viola was awoken by a strange scratching sound at the door. Most of us would have woken our parents or at the very least reached for some sort of weapon, and we're sure Viola did just that. Creeping along the hallway and down the stairs, she edged towards the front door. Who could it be at this time? When Viola plucked up the courage to open the door, she let out an almighty scream. She wasn't expecting to come face to face with whomever was on the other side of the door, and for good reason. It was Mugsy. We don't know what was going on here, but we're pretty sure a dog as lovable as Mugsy could never be confused with a zombie. However, it was undoubtedly him. The dog who had been buried in a grave just hours before was now alive and at the front door. Upon hearing his wife screaming, Glenn was awoken from his sleep and came racing down the stairs to her aid. It's fair to say that Glenn would have been completely taken aback by what he saw. Coming face to face with his furry buddy, the same one he'd buried just hours before, must have had his jaw on the floor. This was something that neither of the couple had been expecting, and we can imagine that they were probably a little taken aback by this revelation. Mugsy is clearly no ordinary canine. In fact, it's pretty clear from this revelation that he's one of those dogs who passed away and then lived to wag the tail. However, we wonder how he could have survived such an ordeal and what it was that gave him the strength and will to climb out of his grave and return home. Glenn and Viola decided that they were going to have to get to the bottom of the incident, and that's why they decided they needed the experts. Later that morning, at a more reasonable hour, a decision was made to take a dirty and unkempt Mugsy to the vet to find out what on earth had happened and to get him much-needed medical treatment as well. Apparently, the vet had determined that when he was hit by the car, Mugsy had been knocked unconscious, but that his heart hadn't stopped. So he'd actually been alive when they buried him, and this is why he must have been able to dig his way out. It seems that Mugsy's background could well have been what saved the dog from actually passing away in his grave. Indeed, Jack Russell Terriers are actually bred to be used for parts of fox hunting, and so he was naturally adept at digging holes and tunneling his way out from the ground. It was this natural instinct that saved his life and allowed for one of the most incredible reunions of all time. The family and their furry friend were back together. A story as uplifting and heartwarming as Mugsy's return from the grave was never going to stay local for very long. It wasn't long before Glenn and Viola had been offered the chance to appear on Oprah to tell their story. In the short space of time, Mugsy had gone from being a regular family dog to a national sensation. Viola detailed how the vet had told them that after around 6 hours, Mugsy must have dug his way out. That's one pretty remarkable pooch. When Glenn and Viola were told about the vet's diagnosis, Glenn wasn't so convinced. He felt that there was no way Mugsy would be able to be buried in the ground unconscious for 6 hours and survive. As far as Glenn is concerned, this was their very own family Christmas miracle. Mugsy survived because he wasn't quite ready to go yet, and so that the two old friends could have a reunion they wanted. It might sound a little far-fetched, but we like Glenn's version. With Mugsy back in the picture, the entire family was finally reunited once again. It must have been so difficult to cope with such a difficult loss, and the family must have been very cut up about it when it happened. We imagine that Viola and Glenn told the kids at some point, and it must have been confusing for them in the end. However, the entire family got to be reunited with their loved one in the end, and that's a good thing. Stories like these can sometimes have a sad ending, but luckily this one doesn't. This heartwarming tale of the dog who couldn't keep away from his family has captured the hearts and minds of so many Americans. From appearing on Oprah through to making the national news, this family probably never imagined that their little Mugsy would ever become so famous. At least they were reunited once more, even if it did give them all a bit of a fright.